Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Have you ever been in a group project where you clearly know what's best? You have one of two options to choose from, and there's one option that in your mind is just significantly better than the other, to the point where the second option makes no logical sense. Yet for some reason, everyone else in the group feels differently, and they have their blinders on. Even though you know this is probably not going to work, you have to listen to what the group wants, and you have to go along with it. And the result, unsurprisingly, is a complete disaster. And because of how poorly it went, you look like a complete idiot, because literally everyone could have told you that it was not going to work out. Well, that's exactly what happened in 2003 with the Las Vegas Bowl. When the bowl was deciding what team to invite out of the Mountain West Conference, they had two options. Executive Director Kunzer-Murphy had one idea in mind, and even went as far as contacting the athletic director of the team that she wanted to tell them that she wanted them to play in the bowl game. However, the rest of the bowl selection committee had a different idea, and went against her wishes. And the result was, well, it was the worst Las Vegas Bowl of all time, and a complete mess from an on-the-field and an off-the-field standpoint. This is the story behind the disaster that was the 2003 Las Vegas Bowl, and the controversy when it came to picking the teams. Before I talk about the game in question, we need some context to understand the team that was the center of this mess, and why Kunzer-Murphy wanted them to compete in the game in the first place. The 2003 season for the Colorado State Rams was somewhat of a down year, if you want to call it that. They were nothing short of superb in 2002. They defeated a number 7 ranked Colorado team, spent a large part of the season ranked inside the top 25 of the AP poll, they won the Mountain West for the third time in the last 4 years, and as the winner of the conference, got to represent the conference in the Liberty Bowl, although they would fall to TCU. For an encore in 2003, however, it was somewhat of a disappointment, especially since they started the season ranked inside the top 25. Now that's not to say it was a bad year, it just wasn't as good as the year before. Back in 2003, the Mountain West had 3 bowl bids. The winner of the conference went to the Liberty Bowl in Memphis. Then, the Las Vegas Bowl got the second pick, and the San Francisco Bowl got the third pick. NCAA rules stipulated that even though a 6-win team is bowl eligible, a 6-win team could not take one of the automatic spots unless there was no one else eligible. This meant that Colorado State, sitting at 5-5 after 10 games, needed to win their final 2 games, or else they not only risked their first season without a bowl game since 1998, and not only risked their first season without a bowl game since moving to the Mountain West, but risked their first season without a winning record since all the way back in 1993, which was the legendary head coach's Sonny Lubbock's first season with the program. There was a lot riding on their final 2 games of the season, especially since San Diego State and UNLV, their final 2 opponents, were hovering around 500 and were in the same boat. But to Colorado State's credit, they did what they had to do, and once again, they were bowl eligible. They defeated the Aztecs of San Diego State in their home finale by a final score of 21-6, and then went on the road to UNLV to defeat the Rebels in a nail-biting 24-23 affair. The 2 wins gave the Rams a record of 7-5, and cleared up the bowl picture tremendously. Utah won the conference with a 10-2 record, and a 6-1 record in conference play, so that was easy. They were going to the Liberty Bowl, and were going to be playing in that game for the first time since 1964. There were 2 teams that had a winning record in Mountain West play and were bowl eligible, so they were getting the other 2 spots. One of them was New Mexico, and the other was Colorado State. One of them would be going to the Las Vegas Bowl, and the other one would be going to the San Francisco Bowl. The Las Vegas Bowl had priority, so they got to choose whether they wanted the Lobos or the Rams. And for Tina Kunzer-Murphy, the executive director of the Las Vegas Bowl, she made it very clear. We want Colorado State. Now we need to ask ourselves the obvious question. Why in her mind did it seem to be Colorado State or bust? What was wrong with New Mexico? And it wasn't that New Mexico was a bad team. It had nothing to do with that whatsoever. The Lobos were playing some fantastic football, had won their last 3 games, had won 7 of their last 8 games, and handed a ranked Utah team their only loss of the season in conference play. Rather, it was the fact that the year before, the Mountain West representative in the Las Vegas Bowl was, as you probably guessed, New Mexico. They lost 27-13 to UCLA. And even though the game was close at the half, being tied at 6 apiece, the Bruins ran away with it in the second half, and score 21 straight points to make it 27-6 late in the fourth quarter. And if given the option between New Mexico and Colorado State, Kunzer-Murphy didn't want to bring New Mexico back if possible. It wasn't that they played poorly in the game, but rather the simple fact that bowl games typically do not succeed when the same team appears in back-to-back years. There are two exceptions to the rule. Exception number one is a Champions Bowl, as in a bowl game where the conference champion plays. If Oregon wins the Pac-12 in back-to-back years, the Rose Bowl isn't going to be upset that they have to invite Oregon 2 times in a row. If there's prestige tied to a bowl game, this does not apply. Exception number two is a local bowl, as in a bowl game where the local team plays, and you can essentially make it another home game. The New Orleans Bowl has been played since 2001, and Louisiana Lafayette played in the New Orleans Bowl for 4 consecutive seasons from 2011 to 2014. The 3 highest attended iterations of the bowl, and 4 of the highest 5 attended, featured Louisiana Lafayette. I'm sure the bowl organizers weren't complaining about their 4-year reign in the game, because it made them a ton of money. However, when it comes to New Mexico and the Las Vegas Bowl, neither of these exceptions apply. The Las Vegas Bowl is not a prestige game where a conference champion makes it, and it is not a BCS game. And obviously, Albuquerque, where New Mexico plays, is not near Las Vegas. If you want to drive in a straight shot between the two cities, it will take you at least 8 hours. On the surface, it makes complete sense why Kunzer-Murphy wanted Colorado State over New Mexico, especially because there is precedent for this. With the Las Vegas Bowl, in 1995, Nevada played Toledo. In 1996, the Bowl Committee brought Nevada back. Again, the Prestige Bowl exception doesn't apply, and the Local Bowl exception doesn't apply, as it is a 6-hour drive minimum from Reno to Las Vegas. The only team that would ever fill the local exception would be UNLV. And the result was that in 1996, the Las Vegas Bowl had its smallest attendance ever, with just 10,118 spectators showing up to watch the Wolfpack take on Ball State. Now, with the game taking place at Allegiant Stadium, I highly doubt we're ever going to see an iteration of the Las Vegas Bowl drawing a crowd that small again, so that will likely be the record forever. As a side note, to learn more about another historically weird game that Ball State played in the 1990s, click the card in the upper right corner. The one time that the Las Vegas Bowl brought the same team back, it was an attendance nightmare. And this matters, outside of the obvious reason of wanting to make more money and make for a better television experience by having a packed stadium, and that was because of NCAA regulations. In 2002, a new rule went into effect saying that for a bowl game to stay in existence, it needed an average attendance of at least 25,000 fans per game over a 3-year period. In other words, if you couldn't draw, you couldn't stay in existence. That rule isn't in existence today, and if you need any evidence of that, may I introduce you to the Bahamas Bowl. But back in the mid-2000s, attendance was key, and having a fan base that would go to the game was vital in the decision-making process. As Kunzer-Murphy said, we need teams who will travel. It's not the number one emphasis we look at, but it plays into it. And perhaps it was more important for this game more than any other bowl game because of where it fell on the calendar. In 2002, the bowl game fell on Christmas Day. In 2003, the bowl game was going to fall on Christmas Eve. I'm going to take a wild guess and assume that there is not a strong alumni base for New Mexico in Las Vegas. So if you invited New Mexico, you're asking Lobos fans to travel and make the trip for 2 consecutive years, spending Christmas away from home and potentially away from their families. That is a tough thing to ask people to do. All of the history and all of the numbers showed that inviting New Mexico to the 2003 Las Vegas Bowl was a recipe for disaster, and it was a disaster that Kunzer-Murphy didn't want. As she said, typically, from a bowl perspective, you don't think to have the same team coming back. The moment that Colorado State became bowl eligible, Kunzer-Murphy called the athletic director Mark Driscoll and made it extremely clear that she wanted the Rams to play in the game. Aside from the fact that they had a bigger fan base, aside from the fact that she was impressed by the 3,000 fans that showed up the last time Colorado State played UNLV on the road, and aside from the fact that they were playing great football, she mentioned the fact that she was extremely skeptical about having the same team play in the game for 2 years in a row. It seemed like a lock that Colorado State would be spending Christmas in Vegas. I mean, when the executive director of the game is flat out saying, "We want you," that's all you need to hear. In fact, it was such a given that all 4 college experts on ESPN.com that did bowl projections had New Mexico playing in the San Francisco Bowl, as based on history and based on those comments, no one thought that Las Vegas would invite them back for a second straight year. So when the bowl games were announced, it came as a shock to everyone that for the second straight year, New Mexico was going to play in this game. Kunzer-Murphy called up Colorado State on the Saturday night that they became eligible to represent the Mountain West in a bowl game. But on Sunday morning, there was a conference call with members of the selection committee, and they decided to overrule her and opted to choose New Mexico, despite everything I mentioned before. I guess the reasoning given on the conference call was the fact that New Mexico had a better record in conference play, had a better overall record, had a ranked win, and beat Colorado State head-to-head. And the members of the committee decided to overrule their executive director and opted to pick New Mexico for the second straight year, which sent Colorado State to the San Francisco Bowl. The 2003 Las Vegas Bowl would put the Beavers of Oregon State out of the Pac-10 and the Lobos of New Mexico out of the Mountain West. This was a huge gamble, especially for a bowl game already on thin ice since they didn't have a corporate sponsor after having Sega sponsor the game for 2 years. And this gamble did not pay off from an on-the-field standpoint or an off-the-field standpoint. Let's start with the attendance, because that's what Kunzer-Murphy was primarily concerned about, and that was what the NCAA was concerned about after that 25,000 rule was put in place. Well, I hope you like red seats, because you were seeing a lot of them at Sam Boyd Stadium on this day. Turns out, Kunzer-Murphy's fears were entirely justified, because after drawing 30,324 fans the year before, they drew just 25,437 fans in 2003, and that is an extremely generous number. I mean, just look at this footage. It was the smallest attendance for the game since 1998, and was a drop-off of roughly 5,000 spectators from the year before, with attendance dropping by 16%. For some perspective, in the over decade-long history of the game at that point, that was the second largest year-to-year attendance drop-off, with the only one larger being from 1994 to 1995. But that can be attributed to the fact that UNLV, the local team, played in the game in 1994, and they were 2-9 in 1995, so bringing them back wasn't exactly an option. That was entirely out of their control. You can't blame them for that. This, on the other hand, was entirely their fault for not foreseeing this. But hey, maybe the game itself was good, right? Oh god, absolutely not. The 2003 Las Vegas Bowl was a Christmas Eve massacre, with the Lobos getting run over worse than Grandma when she got run over by a reindeer. In the biggest blowout in the history of the Las Vegas Bowl, Oregon State dominated, winning it by a final score of 55-14. The 55 points scored by the Beavers was a Las Vegas Bowl record, although it has since been topped by Boise State, who scored 56 in the 2011 Las Vegas Bowl against Arizona State. The 41-point margin of victory was a Las Vegas Bowl record, and that record is still well intact today. 9 of the first 11 editions of the Las Vegas Bowl were decided by 2 possessions or less, so these games were relatively close usually. But not this one. This was pure domination from start to finish, as Oregon State scored on the opening drive and never looked back, with Steven Jackson scoring 5 touchdowns. Jackson became just the 3rd player in college football history at the time, alongside Barry Sanders at the 1988 Holiday Bowl and Sheldon Canley at the 1990 California Bowl, to score 5 touchdowns in a bowl game. So at least the game had that going for it. And Oregon State led at 31-7 midway through the second quarter. At that point, New Mexico had 1 first down. That's it. Oregon State had 29 first downs compared to 7 for New Mexico. Oregon State had 540 yards of offense compared to 127 for New Mexico, more than quadrupling their total yardage. And whereas Oregon State had 154 rushing yards on 4.4 yards per carry, New Mexico had 6 rushing yards on 34 carries. They averaged 0.17 yards per run. If you gave them 56 tries to get a first down, with that average, they still would not be able to pick it up. Other than that, it was a super close game. The 2003 Las Vegas Bowl was an awful game combined with awful attendance, and that is a recipe for disaster. Now, if Colorado State got invited, would things be any different? Who knows? Maybe they still would have lost by 41 or worse, and maybe they would have drawn an even worse crowd. There are a lot of factors at play, and it's just speculation at that point. However, I know this. Putting New Mexico in this game was setting the bowl up for failure. It didn't have to be this way. If the selection committee just listened to Kunzer-Murphy, this all could have been avoided. But the selection committee was so dead set on inviting New Mexico for the second straight year, despite all the evidence going against it, and it backfired in rather spectacular fashion. You've got to know when to hold them, and know when to fold them. And the selection committee really needed to know when to fold this idea of theirs to invite the Lobos. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.